Please join me in welcoming back our distinguished Augustana alumnus, Sandeep Dhir.
Thank you, Dean Berger, for that very generous introduction. Members of the faculty, members of staff, fellow alumni, ladies and gentlemen, students, friends all. So I understand that the students are in day 3 of orientation, and so I should warn you that Dean Berger asked me to speak for about 40 minutes. So for those of you that were planning to head out for a beer after the convocation ceremony, it's going to be a long wait. And for those of you that perhaps went out last night and had a few beers and are feeling a little delicate this afternoon, it's going to be even longer. Let me begin with a confession. When I was first approached informally by Professor Carson Mundell to see if I would be willing to deliver the opening convocation address, it's possible that I considered the request under the courage-enhancing effects of a glass of wine. Since that moment of enhanced self-delusion, I've been racked with ever-changing emotions of trepidation, anxiety, and outright terror. What could I possibly say to all of you? I was conscious of the presence of some of my classmates and fellow alumni, including Professor Mundell himself, Professor Tara Milbrandt, Professor Sandra Rain, about whom I'll have a bit more to say later, who are eminently more qualified than I to deliver this address. I was mindful of the presence of several members of faculty who were my professors and who dramatically altered the trajectory of my life. The concern that this address may adversely affect their own assessment of the success of their instruction to this wayward pupil has loomed large in my mind. This led me to think about my time here and the classes that I took. Whether it was Professor Dietmar Mundell's opening lecture in a mandatory religious studies class, which candidly I resented being forced to take, where he posed the question, what is the good life? And led us on an inquiry of this profound question by exposing me for the first time to Martin Luther King's powerful letter from a Birmingham jail, giving me my first exposure to this great civil rights leader's theoretical framework of the importance of protest and the challenging of injustice by all members of society. Or Professors Harland and Merklinger's meditation on the meaning of citizenship as illuminated by the writings of Aristotle in an IDS class they taught together. Or Professor Epps' presentation of Thomas Hobbes' theory that we all live in a state of nature, which is nasty, brutish, and short, giving rise to the liberal construct of social contract and the critical tension between notions of individual rights and community values. Or the concomitant revelation of sexism and the need to address any inquiry utilizing a gendered lens that came from Cynthia Enlow's Bananas, Beaches, and Bases. I reflected on Professor Bai Reeser's lessons on the Canadian Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, arguably the greatest legal framework ever created, which embedded the concept of the rule of law to ensure that all members of our national community can live a life in equity, equality, and dignity. So, as I try to consider the challenges you as students are confronting as you embark on this stage of your life, and you begin to take the first steps towards inheriting the leadership of our community, I thought about a number of different questions. We stand at the precipice of what appears to be a new and changing world. What does it mean to be safe at a time of so-called global terror? What does tolerance and acceptance mean in the face of what seems to be values held by some which are antithetical to our sense of equity or justice? How will the looming catastrophe of climate change be addressed in a province so intimately tied to resource extraction? At a time when we are confronted by growing inequality between those who have and those who do not, both at home and globally, a time where we have failed to keep the basic promise of food security for all people, a deficit dramatically highlighted by the disparity in our Indigenous communities, which in 2015 shockingly still required our current Prime Minister to promise that these communities will have running water within 5 years. Or closer to home, where all of you wonder what economic security will look like as you embark on finding that first real job and plan your own futures. So, as I reflected on what thoughts I could share with you that might be relevant, I reflected for the first time in so many years about my time here. I recall the motto of the then Augustana, which, if I can paraphrase, was to prepare students as leaders and servants in a Christ-like model. Now, candidly, the religious overtone to this laudable goal never resonated with me. But perhaps to the surprise of some who knew me then, the concept of service to others as the ultimate form of leadership has never been far from my thoughts then or since. This theme imbues concepts of citizenship, civil society, justice, and community, concepts this place was so critical in exposing me to. You may have gathered that I believe the value of a liberal arts education is critical in addressing these concepts. Augustana is unique in its commitment to a true liberal arts education. The excellence of the faculty and their commitment to both continuing research in their respective fields and to sharing their expertise in the classroom sets Augustana apart, especially at a time when learning has become a fast food commodity, where students are clients and the conferring of a degree or a diploma seems to be about a contractual arrangement in which students pull through a drive-through, hand over some money, and are given a bag containing questionable quality and little nutritional value. So why a liberal arts education? Or perhaps more to the point of the question you may have all faced when you said you were interested in a degree in history, or psychology, or biology, or philosophy. Yes, but what job will you get with that? I would suggest that the question of what job you will get is misguided and misses the point of learning. The purpose of learning is to challenge with new ideas, new concepts, to provide the ability to think critically, to ask questions, to challenge orthodoxy, to ultimately come to your own conclusions about what it means to live the good life. When viewed through this lens, I would suggest that Nelson Mandela was right when he opined that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So Professor Mundell used to ask his classes what the good life was. This is not an easy question. It seems to me now that this question is one that we address and readdress every day. For me, I think it starts with the meaning of citizenship. Now, we know that we are privileged to live in Canada, and while we are not as bellicose as our neighbors in the United States, who trumpet at the drop of a hat that theirs is the greatest country in the world, even our self-assessment can be overcome with banal nationalism. Citizenship is not just about waving a flag or proclaiming the strength of a military or a hockey team. Although, let's be honest, hockey really is our game. It is what it means to live in community together, how we treat with others and expect to be treated. It's not just about rights, it's about duties owed to each other. The word for idiot comes from the Greek idios. Aristotle recounts for us that in ancient Greece and the city of Athens, which organized itself into an early form of a democracy, men, and it was men back then, who refused to participate in public affairs were called idiots. The great historian Thucydides wrote, "The man who took no interest in the affairs of state was not a man who minded his own business, but a man who had no business being in Athens at all." So being a citizen means being involved in our community. This, for me, leads to the meaning of civil society. How we as a community organize ourselves, how we treat with each other, what rules or laws we create to govern ourselves are the basis of civil society and part of our pursuit of the good life. If the creation and the maintenance of a civil society that takes us out of Hobbes' state of nature with all of its brutishness, and a citizenship that is active, robust, or Athenian is required of all of us, let me propose to you that such an active citizenship can only be achieved by an informed public. The liberal arts learning you are engaging in is the starting point of that duty we all owe to each other, to engage in real citizenship, in keeping the promise of our nation's civil society. So for me, the next step in this inquiry then is, what do the ideals of equity, equality, or fairness in our civil society mean? Put another way, what does a just society look like? Or even more simply, what is justice? The motto of my law school, translated from Latin, was, "Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall." For many of my classmates, this motto was an obvious reference to the legal system. And it is. But for me, it means much more. Because I'm reminded that in Hebrew, the word for charity is justice. So living in community together requires a commitment to justice. What does justice mean? For Martin Luther King, it was the proposition that all cities in a community were equal, regardless of racial background. And in his last days, it meant a community where no one was hungry or without basic shelter. In the time of Donald Trump and the troubling rhetoric around the Brexit debate in England, it seems necessary to remember that King's proposition should not be considered radical today. And yet, the demonization of immigrants, or Mexicans, or Muslims, or members of the LGBTQ communities, all of whom seek nothing more than the good life, reminds us all that the project of living in a civil society requires constant vigilance against the intolerant, the ignorant, the bigoted, the parochial, the unlearned. Surely our commitment to the promise of a free and just society means that we celebrate the Muslim Canadian woman who chooses to wear her hijab, even as we wonder about the true freedom of that choice and the overtones of sexism and patriarchy that we fear may drive such a choice. Surely our desire to live in a civil society where we treat everyone equally means we accept the biological imperative of members of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters without the childish fear of what bathrooms we can all use. The liberal arts learning that you take up is a toolbox, and it's filled with different tools, all of which you will try and use. Some will feel more comfortable than others, and you'll find some of those tools more useful in your life than others. But it is the exercise of trying those tools, taking a hammer to preconceived notions or beliefs, and rebuilding them with the saw and screwdriver of different thinkers and writers, which will form the true foundation of a life of real citizenship, of activism in our community, whether locally, nationally, or globally. US President John F. Kennedy, at a commencement address at Amherst College in October 1963, a month before his assassination, said, "The men who create power make an indispensable contribution to the nation's greatness, but the men who question power make a contribution just as indispensable, especially when that questioning is disinterested, for they determine whether we use power or power uses us." Now, with apologies for the gender exclusivity of the quote, President Kennedy's exhortation to the students of Amherst that day was to use their learning, their privilege of citizenship, to engage in the affairs of the community, to challenge orthodoxy, to question law and power, and the community's understanding of fairness and justice. His reference to being disinterested was that the challenge and the questioning he was calling for should be in the interest of the nation or the community, and not self-serving. Ultimately, he was asking those students to engage in the community's goal of the pursuit of the good life. And so today, with much less stature or authority than President Kennedy had, I propose to you that your ambition should be more than answering the question about what your real job will be, but how you will discharge your obligation and duty that comes from the privilege of citizenship in this country. Now, at the risk of unpacking everything I have just said, let me take a moment to commend you on your choice of being here for those more mercantile and immediate concerns that you may have. The education I received here, as compared to that which I received at 3 other institutions, was far superior. The smaller classes, the excellence of the professors and not teaching assistants in the classroom, the demand of long papers and not multiple choice exams, the time to engage in the ideas we were taught in long discussions provided me with a skill set that so many of my contemporaries were denied by attending bigger McFactory universities. When I was first asked to give this address, I messaged on Facebook my friends from my time here at Augustana. We shared some memories and laughs. So many of them have gone on from this place to excel in their chosen fields. Dr. Cliff Sample, who was a treasurer of the Students' Union here, is a double specialized surgeon and makes his home in Edmonton and is internationally recognized as one of the best in his field. Wayne Cisnowski, who served on Students' Union Counsel, is now a chartered accountant and who's a partner at his accounting firm in Leduc, and he does my taxes every year. Troy Geldart, who served on the Students' Union Council, was the co-editor of the DAG the year before me, the DAG Hotel. Now works internationally as an IT consultant based in Europe and Saudi Arabia. Mark Evans, who was co-editor of the DAG with me and went on to a journalism degree before finally working at Grand Prairie College as the Director of Public Relations. Stacey Morier, who served on Students' Union Council and now owns her own law firm in St. Albert where she is a partner. Greg Gentile, who served on Student Union Council and went on to become a Red Seal chef in Calgary. And of course, there's my wife, Dr. Sandra Rain, a president of the Students' Union, a DAG co-editor with Troy Geldart, the national treasurer for the Canadian Federation of Students for 2 years, who went on to complete her PhD in political science and is one of your professors. Our messages back and forth after so long reminded me that the learning I've talked about was not limited to the classroom. It took place in the bars and Camrose, including the Alice, where when they cut off service at last call, they'd let us buy 4-liter jugs of beer to take home with us for the continuation of those very important discussions we were having. I should also confess, although Dean Berger has alluded to this already, that I found myself here at Augustana for no more noble reason than my girlfriend at the time, Sandra, and I was here, and I thought she was worth pursuing. 25 years later, I don't regret that decision for the reasons I have shared and for reasons which are much more personal. Your journey may follow Wayne Cisnowski and Tammy Shoplin, now Cisnowski, who met at Augustana and later married. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you can buy Tammy's newly published children's book on Amazon. So, the next years of your life, to sound maudlin and old, will truly be the most exciting. There will be joy, fear, exhilaration, stress, laughs, friendships that will last a lifetime, and hopefully the beginning of your own questioning of what it means to live the good life. As I close, would you please permit me the indulgence of thanking you, the Dean, and the faculty for this opportunity. For the son of immigrant parents who were not afforded the privilege of this level of learning and came to our country hoping for a better life for their sons, this opportunity shall rank as one of the high honors of my life. Thank you.
Sandeep, thank you so much for your inspiring remarks today, and on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to present you this small gift.